Cool. So we're back
Right.
indeed.
Yeah, so it would seem. But what does it mean to be back? That's the question. Back where?
Yeah, we're back talking to each other and recording it to share it with the world. The last time
Good.
we talked or shared anything with the world was our conversation with Don O'Shea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's striking to me that it would be with of all things, a Catholic priest, because I don't think either of us would have anticipated that we'd be interviewing someone like that for this podcast about play, an elderly priest at that. Um, and yet, in that time, the time that's elapsed between us talking to Father O'Shea and now today with us talking to each other, I do feel like I'm coming around to seeing things from a much more spiritual angle. That the project that I'm involved in, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you or put words in your mouth, but it feels like if it's not grounded in some kind of much deeper rejuvenation than any effort to just rejuvenate, the body or become more superficially playful is kind of all for naught.
And you're referring to this project, this Rescape project of ours.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that this thing that we're doing is it's still like a little seed in the dirt and it hasn't really sprouted yet or grown. And I'm trying to figure out what kind of thing it is before it starts growing. Like, do I want to water it? Do I want it to come out of
Hmm.
the ground? And I'm thinking more and more that I do, but for good reasons. Like, um, I don't know if like you and I were both kind of ordinary people, and I don't know if there's anything so special about us that people should listen to us over the billion other podcasts that are out there clamoring for their attention and kind of clogging up their lives. The idea that I'm going to add to the landfill of like good advice is kind of horrific. And yet I still have this weird sense of faith that what we're doing, we're going to figure out what we're doing, but what we are trying to do is of some fundamental value. And if we can figure out how to do it properly, it will be of service to people.
Yeah, I agree. But when you say that we're offering advice, that word always it irks me.
Good.
Like the world is, well, not the world in general, but let's say the digital world or this techno sharing sphere is full to the brim of people giving advice. And it seems that more often than not, it's the wrong people are giving advice. It's young people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's such a risky game to play to tell someone what they ought to do
Yeah.
to what to better their life. I mean, how does anyone know what to do to better their life?
Yeah. There's a really useful distinction between tactics and strategy that I understand from chess, like or other difficult games. And it's something like this. Tactics are short-term little hacks you can use to get the immediate thing that you want to do next. But a strategy is like a long view. It understands the much bigger picture and it's moving towards a much more profound or coherent goal. And I think we're awash in tactics and we don't have any strategies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you think that maybe I'll rephrase it. Do you think that consciously or perhaps unconsciously you have a life strategy, or are you still in like a formulation stage? Or another option, are you modifying a previously established strategy?
Yeah, I think that if you were to look at my life, the surface of my life, like let's say CCTV cameras set up around my house, and you were watching me for some reason month after month, you would see me do a lot of the same things again and again and again, and you would come to the conclusion that I was in a holding pattern. But if you could see inside my head, you'd realize loads of things are changing. And I think I'm going through a radical recalibration period where I'm asking really deeper questions about where I'm going, why I'm going there, why I'm going this way, that route, like why I'm taking these various different practices and putting time into them, and everything is being revisited. There's no danger that I'm going to suddenly leave my wife and kids or anything that radical, but the way that I'm interacting with my wife and kids could be overhauled and overhauled uh, to its much greater betterment, because there's no way on earth that I'm doing the best job I could as a father or a husband or a citizen or in anything else, you know?
Wow. There's no way. I mean,
No, I think I'm good. I'm adequate. I'm sort of like I'm a solid B, B minus, something like that.
oh yeah, that's okay.
It's okay. I'm not beating myself up about it, but I'm just tantalized by the idea that there's a way of being much less of an asshole far more of the time. And that's such a promise. That's such an intriguing thing. Like, imagine if you could just imagine a person who's completely riddled with ticks, right? You know, like they're constantly squinting. And I think of the poor Zizek, you know, he's constantly blowing his nose and grabbing his nose and pulling his ear and squirming around in his chair, and he has to like go three different ways to answer a simple question. And I just think, I'd imagine if he could just take a breath and stop all the jumping around and just calmly say what he needed to say. He'd have so much more energy. He seems pretty energetic already. He'd have so much more energy to share with people and to do things in a cool, relaxed, but alert way. I wish that kind of for myself. I feel like I'm the same. I don't look as extremely neurotic as Zizek does, but inside there's a whole bunch of twists and kinks and stuff that just they just don't need to be there. It's just a bunch of bad conditioning that I just kind of like weeds. I just rip them up. There's no real deep roots to them. I can pull them up easy.
This is the overhaul you're talking about. So, like remapping this preconditioning.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's different for every person. Like, um, I've grappled with trying not to drink. Like when I come home on the train, uh, I teach pretty late into the evening, so I get a very late train home, and I'm kind of tired and a bit run down. Don't really want to do anything difficult, or I barely even want to kind of relax because even that feels too boring. So the temptation is always to get a fairly strong, cheap beer from the off license that's in the train station right by where my train leaves, and then drink the beer on the train and become kind of mildly euphoric because it got alcohol in my system. And like giving that up always feels like a real struggle to me. You know, it's I'm always kind of like I can always feel that it takes willpower to go, don't buy that beer before you get on the train. But lately, this in this recalibration phase that I'm going through, I've just found that like the beer just strikes me as a stupid thing to do. It's like buying a whoopee cushion and sitting on it, like and trying to look at the flab. It just seems that kind of really like it's so easy to put down because it's stupid. It's self-evidently stupid.
Why is it stupid? Stupid because in the long term is poisoning you.
Yeah, it's sort of I think it's a way of saying you reach for all these comforts because you're kind of uncomfortable all the time. But why are you uncomfortable?
And have you come up with an answer for why are you uncomfortable?
Um, I think it's something like boredom is the shallow kind of surface of a sphere of suffering. And that just under the surface of boredom, we're scared that if we go further and further down into that, it'll be completely unbearable. And so we want to stay away even from the surface. We want to, as soon as we feel boredom, we want to be entertained. And whether that's through drugs or TV or anything else, it kind of doesn't matter. Just as long as there's something there keeping us from facing that terrible sphere. But I think that the thing is, if you can actually go down through boredom, you find that what's underneath isn't suffering. It's something closer to fascination.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that because when you were talking about the layer of boredom and being underneath it is let's say the abyss, and for this frightening thing to do is to stare at the abyss because you might see it stare back at you.
Yeah. I
I
think that
then
that,
think
yeah.
I think then that like what you're saying is, if I'm hearing you correctly, like you sound like you're a classic person. I can completely relate with you that there is this kind of like low level, constant anxiety that only goes from low through medium to high level, but never no. Well, maybe occasionally no, and that's often during an altered state via chemicals or maybe an altered state through entertainment or
Yeah.
distraction, digital.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is
And
not to
then,
say that all
go on.
happiness is always hiding from terror or something like that. I don't think it is. But there's real happiness. But I'm just talking about these kind of cheap budget knockoff substitutes for happiness, which we'll call distraction.
Yeah, right? It's all distraction.
A lot
I
of it
suppose
is
we're
here.
seeking this distraction because we're afraid to look below the surface. Would that be a way of summarizing what you just said?
Yeah, and I just want to add here, there's a reason why we're afraid. Like, I mean, I don't think that it's simply a case of everyone's totally wrong, and that if they simply punched through the boredom, what they'd find would be like this Shangri-La of happiness and fun. I think that as you get deeper down into that center of the sphere, I don't know why I'm calling it a sphere, but let's just go with it. As you
Mm.
go down to the center, you are getting closer to awe, and awe is easily as much fear as it is wonder and delight and euphoria. It's like it's all of the huge emotions all together. So it's so huge and sublime, you can't really contemplate how profound it can get. And so it makes sense that as a flimsy little human contraption, you're going to go, yeah, you know what? I think I'm just going to watch TV.
Like part of that, I wasn't expecting to say sublime. I thought you were leading towards the collective fear of death, and that we're all, in a way, avoiding looking at the inevitability of it.
That's one aspect of it, right? Fear of death is one aspect of the sublime.
Of the sublime, yeah, right? Because if you meditate long enough on the inevitability of death, then you're kind of forced to imagine it, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, there's not enough points of reference to create a clear image. So depending on how you imagine what this is, you can't necessarily expect to be right.
I think that the three main pictures that people have, and none of them sound very enticing, run something like this. There's oblivion, you just stop, which is literally unimaginable, but very scary sounding. Then there's some kind of eternal afterlife. And obviously the hell sounds terrible, but the heaven sounds pretty appalling too, because it's total status. I like some sort of you have to be in that state forever and ever and ever and ever, and that sort of is appalling again to the human mind. And then finally there's reincarnation, which is you're you, but you get another body, and you don't even know what kind of body it would be or what kind of world you were born into. So it's still very frightening. So you have three kind of major options on the table. They all seem horrific on some level. Um, but I think that there's kind of a fourth, which is to me the most intriguing one, which is you aren't really you. And that if you could realize that you're non-dual with this much, much vaster, again, sublime mystery, that it's not about you ending or you continuing somewhere else. It's about you realizing that you're not really you. You're much more than you.
Yeah,
It doesn't even make sense to be afraid.
exactly. That's hence the long pause. Like, it's nothing to even put a finger or an eye on. Like the reincarnation one would have been my latest meditation after reading the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying,
Of course.
and then following an old read of Plato's Republic. I mean, that seems to be the theme that these books touch on. That you go and you get a list of what it is you'd like to come back as, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again and again and again and again and again. Which is not, which could mean then at the same time, I am you and you are me,
Yeah.
and I am
What
everyone and you are everyone.
we're like jujitsu partners, and we're practicing on each other to see if we can get better at this jujitsu that we call consciousness or something.
Mm. Yeah. What would be the techniques you practice, right, if you were to get it right? I know we're talking about like forming a religion here, so let's be careful that we don't form a cult accidentally. But like, if it was us, go on. If
Um,
we were to practice the techniques of doing it better, because we are going to run it on a continual loop, what would you think would be like at least one of the techniques?
do you mean you and me specifically, or do you mean people in general?
Well, I think it's easier to play the game if we're talking about you and me specifically rather than do a think for everyone
Yeah.
else. So, for example, if I were to go back to the same experiment, the thought experiment, I'm you and you are me, and this is forever. No, actually, let's go wider. Let's go a broader scope. Like if people were to practice the jujitsu of
Hmm.
reincarnation, what would be the techniques you'd practice? Not that other texts have suggested you practice,
Yeah.
but just that something that you'd think, here's what we could do if we're going to be doing it forever.
Okay, I've got an answer.
Brilliant.
There was this genius called Michel de Montaigne, and he invented the essay. But he invented the essay under very strange circumstances. Like a bunch of really important people in his life died one after the other. And he just was beset with concerns about mortality and death and not really knowing why anything was the way it was. And he just basically pictured a person with exactly zero certainty. He was totally lost in the forest of the world. And he was a wealthy guy and he retreated to this big, it looks like a fortress. It's got these big stone turrets and he had a library inside. He called it the Citadel. It's like almost like a mythic place.
I
He
never heard of it.
retires to the Citadel. And he's got this big library and it's full of books that he's picked up over the years. And he becomes aware of the fact that he doesn't know if these books are bullshit or not, right? So he writes in his library above, like a motto above everything, what do I know? And he just becomes radically skeptical. He starts asking himself really basic questions about everything he sees, like why is that that way? And why am I this way? And why do I believe that? He invents the essay as this like Frankenstein, this monster. His job is to like serve him new ways of thinking and questioning, above all else, questioning everything, every aspect of his life and the lives of those around him. Customs, fears, anxieties. He writes about cannibalism, superstition. He writes about the weirdness of having thumbs. And he's got all these like weird, random kind of observations. But he does this. He writes hundreds of essays, and they're like an intellectual yoga where he's grappling with just the fact that he can ask questions and he can play with answering them. Like the word essay just literally means give it a shot. Like just try your best. And I think that's a good way to live. To just kind of instead of being certain about everything, you can just get radically skeptical. Not in a cynical way, like not like I don't believe in anything, but more like I need to come to my own understanding in my own way, in my own words. And once I have that, I have a lot more than I ever had before. No matter how educated I am, if my education's all secondhand and I got it handed to me from other people, then it's not really mine. I got to build my own education from the ground up. I got to start my own citadel and I got to be the king inside of it.
So the technique we're practicing is essay writing.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's also dialectic, right? When you talk to me and I talk to you, that's the spoken version of what
Hmm.
you're doing in your own head when you're writing an essay.
Yeah, we're understanding ourselves through each other.
Yeah, this is more social.
Yeah, I do enjoy an essay writing.
They're
Thanks to
different.
you.
They have different powers, right? When you're talking to another person, like a different part of your mind is alive, like it's social and it's way more physically easy to chat than it is to like write, sit down for hours at a time and bang out an essay, as you know.
Mm.
There's some value to writing too, because you're on your own and you actually get to stop for maybe like 20 minutes to think something through before you say the next thing. You can't really do that with a conversation. It'd be weird. So you need both. You just need both.
So, essay writing and conversation would be two techniques in the jujitsu of eternal living.
Yeah, let's consider one like really, really slow motion jujitsu, and the other is kind of faster jujitsu.
Which one's faster?
Well, that's a good question, actually. But I think usually most people would understand that conversation or dialectic is seems to be seems to be faster. Although actually, if you were to measure it in terms of units of significant information,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
you're probably getting more like aha moments per well written paragraph because it's crafted. than you are in every given, let's say, minute of recorded conversation.
That's what I was thinking about with honest writing, the distance you travel, let's say internally into your own ideas, I'd say is bigger leaps than they are in definitely in small talk, but in like a proper what you'd call a DMC, a deep, meaningful conversation. I still think that I suppose you'd have the occasional leap in a conversation, but in essay writing, from my experience, I would take broader steps than I do in conversation. And those
Mm,
aha moments, now that you mentioned them, I think from a neurochemical point of view, they're called long-term potentiation. It's where there is almost like an explosion in the brain, little micro grenade goes off.
yeah.
And if I'm correct, it's like there's the commencement of a synaptic reach, like the synapse begins to reach out.
Mm,
And it's called long-term potentiating because that reaching happens for a while. And then you could have another aha moment later on, and they may merge, meet, and grab onto each other, which would be like two ideas coming together to make sense, which forms another aha moment. And they are the opposite of long-term depression,
wow.
which
Do you know
is
what?
basically no ideas going off in the mind.
That reminds me of, it makes me think of the Sistine Chapel ceiling and Adam reaching out to God, and their fingers are just about to touch. And it's
Yeah,
like
well done, really
creation,
good,
neurogenesis. It's actually got Genesis in the title. Like
right?
it's always a new beginning. It's always Eden in your brain if you're growing.
Yeah. Well, and even just I can just imagine getting permission, or even just sneaking in and lying beneath the Sistine Chapel. I mean, if I'm talking about an aha moment being a brain grenade, that's a nuke. Like,
No. Yeah, it's funny to use the language of weaponry and also be thinking about Genesis at the same time, but it
I
seems like
suppose, but it's just the times at the
appropriate.
moment. Yeah, right. It's freaking horrific, and I think it's best we stay clear.
Yeah, we don't need to go down that particular route today.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
There's an engineer called Claude Shannon, a very famous American scientist, and he was charged by, I think, uh, AT&T or some major company like that to figure out what information was, because they wanted to charge people for it. Like, the way you charge people for electricity, if they're on the water meter, you charge them for the water they're using. And these guys deal with information, so they kind of wanted to know what it was. And Shannon had to go away and think about it because it's actually kind of a weird question, but
It certainly
the
is.
the answer he came up with was information is anything that reduces uncertainty. And so I like the idea of there being a parallel signaling system that you might call wisdom. And wisdom, I think, does it kind of increases wonder. And but it's very hard to measure. Like I don't know how you measure Shannon style, the wisdom quotient of a text or a conversation. I mean, it's a meta problem maybe that can't be solved because you'd have to be wiser than the content to evaluate it. But I would aspire to trying to increase whatever wisdom quotient I could put into anything I'm communicating, certainly in public, because I don't want to get lost in any chit chat about culture war crap or any of that stupid stuff. That's just noise, you know.
Hmm. That's interesting that it was classified as, if I'm right, you said information being the reduction of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But wisdom isn't the same as information, right?
No, I don't think so at all.
You called
I
wisdom
think a lot of people think
closer
it
to
is.
wonderment. It certainly isn't because one of the wisest thing ever written was that certainty is the path to insanity.
Certainty.
Uh,
Yeah,
It
and
was written above the Temple of Delphi, right? At
there's a
Apollo.
lot of oracular statements. I think a lot of people think there's just one or two, but I think there was like well over 200.
Yeah, but I think it's the entrance has the most significant. It's at the entrance you have certainty leads to madness, know thyself, and another one. There was three, I
Mm,
think, are the most significant, and they have it at the
it's
entrance, and
interesting.
then the other ones are on the inside. So then I wonder, I didn't mean to use wonder, but the wisdom thing, does it increase or decrease certainty? You know what I mean? Because one of the wisest thing ever said was, the only thing I know is that I know nothing at all.
Mm.
And
I think
I think the embracing of uncertainty is one fantastic way of reducing anxiety, and then another way of stepping into an enchanted way of life, like a state of wonderment
yeah,
rather
I
than
think
bewilderment.
it's something like if you were to say, what defines a truly athletic body? Is it the musculature's ability to tense up and generate force, or is it the muscle's ability to relax and release tension? And when you look at an athlete, it looks like it seems like the answer is both
Yeah, I'd be
those
very
opposite
sure.
things, right? In order to be fast or elastic or whatever, you need to be able to release and contract tension like elastic band or something. You need to be
Hmm.
both. You need to be fluid in your motion. And I think that with a wise mind, it's something like wisdom. The active component of wisdom is a deep pattern recognition that is pretty good at figuring out where it is and what's happening and not being confused or distracted easily. But then also the ability to let go of certainty and embrace a wonderment that allows you to make new discoveries. So that seems to me like the spiritual version of athleticism.
Yeah, right. That's the relaxation portion of the tension that you're talking about. So yeah, both are needed.
Yeah, like
That's really cool, man. That's
the,
really good.
the complete yoga teacher is someone who is sort of they can be as tense or as relaxed as they need to be in the moment.
When you bring up the yoga teacher, my mind straight away goes to a white girl in yoga pants, and it's so bothering. The modern yoga teacher is nothing even in the same universe as the yoga teacher you're talking about.
I don't know how we as a society invest in getting our wise elders back and making them the center of a saner, calmer, less narcissistic world. But it's a matter of utmost urgency.
Yeah, like how do we do that? That's a good question to ponder upon. I mean, how do you reclaim in the social conversation, for example, of what yoga means? Like, I have a above average concept of what it means to be a yoga teacher.
Mm.
And still, when you mention a yoga teacher, that chick pops up in my mind.
Yeah. Well,
So then
listen,
yoga to the average person is that, right?
yeah, that's right.
So like how how could you get it to the point where like I suppose what I'm trying to come around to is that in early 2000s, let's say, the idea of doing yoga, particularly here in Ireland and working class Ireland, was hippy dippy. Like, and you'd be called gay as an insult or something to that effect, right? It was just
Mhm.
like way out there. Now yoga is so commonplace. It's in every suburb. It's in every. You'd in a rural community. You'd probably go to yoga in the community hall, like
Yeah. It's something of a
yoga in air quotes. Let's say.
yeah, I know. But it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory, isn't it? Because they've succeeded in watering it down to the point where it's sort of it's a genial, benevolent, non-competitive thing to do with your body. So it's fine. It's just as unobjectionable as liking to go for long evening walks or something. It's perfectly pleasant thing to do, but it seems to
Hmm.
be missing the most important thing that makes it yoga, which is something akin to like properly understood, I would say. And I think I might be sort of stealing this from Terence McKenna or something he said, but he said if you were really about to go out the door of your house to go practice yoga, you should be trembling with fear because you're about to meet the divine.
Mm.
Like there's no way we don't have, it seems, a place for that in our world. There's no place for us to go, I'm entering into a mystery and it's going to obliterate all this stupid clown car of a set of flaws that I call my life. Like,
And it would take a lifetime, like a dedicated lifetime, full-time job to even hope to get to that level of skill.
yeah, but someone should be doing it, right? Because we invest huge amounts of time in training our medical staff and our, um, you know, professors in the natural sciences. And by the way, that's totally appropriate investment of time. Like,
Mhm.
we cannot know too much about the natural world or how to heal people. But it seems self-evident that working from a purely physical standpoint ain't going to do it because we're not purely physical creatures. We, if we're untethered from a sense of meaning, I think Carl Jung said this, the unconscious has a very funny knack of killing the entity that has become untethered from meaningfulness.
By Karen Armstrong
Yeah, she's great.
on the, yeah, well, it was on your recommendation actually, and now
Mm.
I'm after finding her as an author, and I'm just devouring her stuff. And she's writing in the book I'm reading about the axial age,
Mm.
this period in time, roughly at 700 BC to somewhere between 400 BC and nearer to us.
Mm.
And when she's like at the same time as in India, let's say yoga is coming to the conscious mind, the concept of it anyway. Confucius is always is walking the land too with his ideas, and the Greeks are figuring their way out too. And you have these guys in India, and the the translation for how they were described is the renouncers. And they were guys, they could have even been married men with
Mm.
children who leave the home and go live a life of poverty in the woods, get by on begging, and through this lifestyle, they come to hopefully understand the divine and end up in this position of deep wisdom, where people then later in life, or like this could be a 20-year commitment, will go to these guys for wisdom.
Yeah.
Renouncers. They just turn their back on everything that currently is to be alone within the trees, let's say, and beg.
Yeah.
Like they give up clothes, they sit in the street naked with their hand out. They're fed on what they're given or they can find. But they are the ones then that are respected. They're the ones that like you'll turn to in time. That's the
Yeah.
commitment they've made.
But it's a weird puzzle too, because to some degree, some form of renunciation, I think, is required of everyone at some point in their life, even if it's just temporarily to turn away from the world and turn somewhat more inward. That just seems necessary to most people. But how much we want to ask of people to become, totally detached from the world, I actually don't know the answer to that question. On the one hand, I'm kind of attracted to the kind of heightened purpose that a person might have. They've truly given up all wealth and they've become celibate and all these other things. And part of me also thinks, like a la Tantra, that a, an ordinary householder, as the Buddhists call them, could learn about what ordinariness is and have lessons to teach about that. That the mystic in the forest kind of can teach you about. He doesn't know what it's like.
Yeah.
He doesn't
And
know your struggle. He doesn't know what it's like, really.
yeah, he doesn't comprehend like Zen in the art of fatherhood, let's say, or 9 to 5, and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I suppose the mundanity of what I suppose you were talking about the loop you go on earlier, like. But yeah, you're saying that there's a place for a renunciation, and I think everyone, maybe past a certain age, has that call to just run away, like give up all obligations. There's an inner call for it. I wonder, as a society, is there a place to facilitate that? Off you go now and just have your sabbatical, I suppose, in the woods, but everyone, not just
Mm.
the young people, everyone. You reach a certain age, off you go. Go stare at a cave, see if you make it.
You see that I think the paradox here is that the young people that need to do it wouldn't know how to do it, and the older people haven't done it, so they can't guide them. It's like, how do you start? This is a unique
Yeah,
problem.
that's what I like throwing it out there. How would you even start?
I think you'd have to start small. One of the dangers, I suppose, that as we live in an age where there's greater uncertainty, but also more potential, and so it's a kind of wild west of ideas. So it's like
Hmm.
there's no shortage of spiritual ideas out there. If anything, it's kind of a clamoring marketplace for new age philosophies and alternative methods of, you know, breathing in a certain way, like holotropic breath work or, primal scream therapy, or there's a million and one ways of like dropping out of the traditional square bourgeois life and, finding your inner wild and all this. But I think that the danger is it just, the potential danger of it is that you could kind of just go on a big whirlwind tour of the marketplace of spiritual materialism, to borrow a phrase from Chogyam Trungpa, where you could just try on a bunch of fun clothes and play around being a kind of crazy saint. You don't really, there's nothing, you've no responsibilities, like you've no one to answer to, you've no particular moral code that you've sworn to uphold. There's none of the discipline, there's just all of the fun.
Hmm. And for there to
There's
be a
none of the
spiritual
sacrifice.
marketplace,
It's not really renunciation. It's just turning your back on a bunch of stuff you didn't want to do in the first place.
yeah, right. So then that's not really spirituality at all. It's kind of like Peter Panning
That's
it.
goofing off, man. That's goofing off.
Yeah,
And it's nothing against. I've nothing against goofing off. Goofing off is great. I just think that you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want to hang something like your spiritual development on it because, except for a short palate cleanser, I don't think it's got any real value.
yet it's like you said, it's in a marketplace at the moment.
A crowded one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A saturated one. Like you said, we listed off a few there as an example of it. So then there's a seeking public, and then you'll have a few of these goof offs selling something, selling ideas.
Yeah, I mean, some of the ideas are kind of dangerous too, because sometimes there are people who are like, I don't want to be a goof off, I want to be serious, right? So I want to sign up to a serious philosophy. And the next thing you know is they're basically signing up to a war cult because they want to take part in like their version of a holy war where they're going to purge the world of all the bad guys and finally it'll just be good guys. And that's the kind of extreme dark end of the spectrum that I really, really worry about with the free play, as it were, of spiritual ideologies. Like I think once they get out of hand, you actually get a bunch of really idealistic people, and you can weaponize that idealism pretty easily.
Yeah. Prior to the National Socialist Party, weren't they a bunch of guys who were hanging out in the woods? The Wunderwagen. That's what it started as, right? They were like Boy Scouts.
Basically, and they still were. I think they were just like psychotic Boy Scouts.
Oh, that's so haunting in the fact that like it could begin with like a call to nature. I'm just going to get away from it all and live in the
Yeah.
trees. And then you flash forward like a decade and you're gassing people.
Yeah, yeah. That line of
Maybe it's
logic
not a
kind of got
decade.
away
I
from
don't
me.
want to be quoted on saying it's a decade time frame. I'm just kind of like being satirical here, but it wasn't much more than 20, 30 years.
But
It
here's the
probably took me
thing,
a
and
decade, man.
I'm really struck by the fact, whatever about the time frame, I think that once people have, for want of a better phrase, spiritual conversion experiences, it's kind of like you've been on a lazy river and now you're just going down like the water plume, like you're just shooting on the water
Hmm.
slide. Like you can travel a great distance very, very quickly once you go down a particular rabbit hole. And so, it, which rabbit hole you end up going down is pretty important. And I mean, I know it goes without saying, but it just feels like the internet is a machine for proliferating rabbit holes,
Yeah,
and
very true.
more people are going down them and ending up in random places and then looking at each other as if they were the aliens.
Yeah, right on. And then so many people have generated identities and income in their rabbit hole. You're kind of stuck. So if you, I mean, if you want to climb back out, you're in a bit of a pickle because you're recognized as, let's say, a professional or someone worthy of receiving a value exchange for whatever it is this rabbit hole had led you towards. And if you have like a emerging inner conflict, do I give up my livelihood or stay hurtling down this rabbit hole?
Yeah, actually, that's really striking because I've noticed that I consume a lot of podcasts, and it's probably one of the reasons why I'm tepidly trying to do a podcast with you is that I'm figuring, well, if this is the way we communicate with each other, I'll give it a go. But one of the things I've noticed about Podcastistan is that the people I most respect, once they're in there for a while, they start to become, it's almost like they stop being who they are and they start to become people playing themselves. And they have this role. They figured out that their niche in that ecology is, to give you an example of Jordan Peterson, let's say, he's the stern father figure. So it's like
Mm.
this is his role on TV now, and he has to play that to the nth degree all the time. And he can't not be that because he's stuck in that mode. And, someone else is the skeptic that sees through all the lies, and they have to play that role all the time. But they're the kind of immature big brother that keeps making all the politically incorrect jokes because he's a real free thinker. And he's stuck being that big brother, um, goof off, but truth teller type role. Everyone's playing like a caricature of a family member or like some recognizable societal figure. And it just feels like like a big pantomime, this big, gross, garish pantomime of people playing the roles of clowns or wise people or whatever. And it's clearly madness. I
Hmm.
don't know what I'm hoping to fix by jumping into the melee here, but I hope that I believe that we will not succumb to that kind of caricature thing. But once you become famous and there's money on the table, like you say, I just think the incentive to become and stay that character professionally is incredibly high.
Yeah, it would be hard to give it up. I wonder, do you just lose yourself? Do you become this thing?
It must be
Or
great to kind of embrace a role and go, oh, so this is what I am. And everyone is confirming it. So this must be what I am. Finally, I found my true self.
and what if that is the case? What if it is actually the true self and some like self-actualization and in they've become
Yeah, they've
just as a
arrived.
totally different. Yeah, arrived at who they should be, if
The
that's even
way
a reality
Yeah,
or
I know.
some
Like the
truth
way
to it.
cults work, the concept of love bombing is that once you start to kind of fall in line with the dictates of the cult, they praise you so much and they tell you that you belong so much that you end up like
Mm.
you swap out your old sense of self for a brand new one. And the love bombing here is actually weirdly almost the reverse. The audience love bombs the cult leader into thinking he or she is this new role, and they want
Mm.
them to stay playing that role or her playing that role. They want you to keep being Oprah Winfrey because they need an Oprah Winfrey and
Yeah,
you're willing to be it. So you're going to be that now until like you die. And I think this idea of a true self versus a false self might be an unhelpful way of splitting it up because, the social self is always kind of a performance. I mean, you know yourself that you behave differently when you're around your mates than when you're around your mom or whatever. But I still believe there's some sort of core or inner nature that is predisposed towards a certain kind of outcome. There's some variability, but there's basically an optimal version of you that you could move towards, and any other thing is some kind of contortion to please others or some other kind of agenda. I don't know though. I don't know if it's true, but I would
no,
say,
you're very right. I think you're right. Like to please others is one thing, but and then to keep your bank account padded is another one. What the different things that incentivize someone to create a character.
Yeah, it weird because in a capitalistic world, you really have no choice but to do something for money. It's totally appropriate. And if the main thing you're doing is producing content, and that's how you're supported, and in a way, the more revenue you make is just evidence that you're doing it right. I totally get how people might become obsessed with that game. Um, it's just, and this is one of the things we were asking ourselves at the inception of the Rescape project is what are the kinds of games that we do play? What are the better games we could be playing? And it seems to me that we're all down in a layer of gameplay that's pretty good. I mean, it's entertaining, it's interesting. I'm just wondering if there are more interesting games that we could be playing.
And more valuable games, eh, as well as interesting.
Yeah,
Like
I think,
what do you get in return? Like first of all, like even reflecting on the question of what games are we playing? I mean, there is a chance that some of these characters we're talking would have never asked that question. They're just kind of like, again, hurtling down the rabbit hole.
yeah,
And if you do ask yourself that question, what games are you playing? It actually brings us back to the start of the podcast where you're overhauling yourself, which makes me think you're asking yourself how you could play your roles or your position as a father and a husband and a teacher better.
yeah, because they're the main games you're playing, so you definitely want to improve them. But I think that sometimes what people think is that they're all separate games, and they need to work on them independent of one another. And I get that; it kind of makes sense. But I think a much deeper game is the game that you are playing of having a self, like your relationship to that thing. And to the
Mm.
extent that you think that you're you, a distinct thing separate from the world that's fragile and could get injured or embarrassed or whatever else, mightn't get what it wants, it's just kind of worried. That affects every aspect of every single thing you do. So if there's some way of realizing that you are actually some kind of mystery. You're floating on the surface of a boundless mystery that's generating you, and it's having this adventure of being you. That really does kind of change everything about what you do next.
Yeah, it sure does. You're making me think of a psychedelic experience I had when I tried 5-MeO DMT via the Buffo tour,
Yeah.
which I didn't like. I didn't know what I was getting into when I said yes to the invite. I didn't even have to pay for it. It was like, "You want to come along?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." Sounds like an interesting invitation. Without going into the details of it, afterwards, the question I was left with was, "How do I love better?"
Yeah.
That when you started the conversation talking about, improving your position as a father and a husband and that was the question that came to mind. And that's what you were reminding me of when I had that time period of my own life was when I was asking myself, how do I love better? It seemed to me, I suppose, make me play a game or self-reflect or express myself in such a way that I was playing this mystery of being in such a way that I felt like, I still kind of feel like I couldn't lose or anyway do any worse if I orientated myself to love better.
Yeah. I think that any entity, whether it be a book or a podcast or a psychedelic drug or anything else that brings you to really, really not like casually ask that question, but really feel it as like the main driving question of your life, that's a sacrament.
Sacrament, wow, yeah.
What else could it
Yeah,
be?
yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's why, hence the wow.
Yeah, I mean, what else could it be? What else are we doing?
What else are we doing? I listened to a friend of mine on another podcast the other day, and he is a dance teacher. And in fact, he was teaching me dance for a period during COVID, actually, which was quite interesting. I'll tell you a small portion of that. Pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, so let's say early 2020, it was Christmas 2019, and I reached out to a friend of mine and said, for 2020, I'd like to hire you as a coach. I
Mm.
want to explore acrobatic dancing a bit more and what it is you have on offer. Matt Mulligan is his name. Body Roots is his company. And and he asked me these great questions, and it was completely a co-creative thing, and we were doing great. And the pandemic came along, and we talked about this recently, yourself and I, where a few specialists have said everyone is traumatized from the pandemic and still are. And you were saying, really? And now you're coming to the conclusion that, yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
And now, when I reflect on this period with Matt, a large portion of it was doing a macaco and back handsprings and back bridges. And so, for the listener who can't get an image of that, it's ultimately extending my spine and reaching the floor behind me in an explosive jump. It's kind of like a backflip, but it's far less skill required involved in it.
Kind of like a lower backflip.
Yeah, and you can go off at an angle sideways and you can
Yeah.
bail out at like from 12 to 3 o'clock if you want to. So let's say January to early March, this was going quite well. This was going really well, in fact. And then after that, I was very much struggling to extend my body. I couldn't open up and I couldn't figure it
Wow.
out. So I was doubling down on repetition. I'll do more. I'll do more. And I couldn't do it. And it took me a long time afterwards to realize that um, it was Matt who was telling me, do you think that by just doing it a lot, you're going to get it? And I was, of course. And he was trying to get the message across. It's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it,
Yeah.
how
If
you're being.
anything, like you're training yourself to fail.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was compounding it.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the recent podcast that he was on, his closing point, which is similar to the proposition of to the listener to consider how it is you could love better, he proposed to the listeners of that podcast, what is it you could ask yourself on a daily basis? Or could you ask yourself on a daily basis, what my body is asking for to enjoy it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
In order,
another question, I suppose, or a reflection similar to the how can I love better is how can I enjoy myself?
what you're pointing to is so profound because I think that what people do, a lot of, I don't want to speak obviously for everyone, but it seems glancing at the billions of pages that are written on fitness advice and all the other things, the main drivers, judging by, what you see online towards physical activity are some unholy mixture of fear of premature death, do these exercises lest you die earlier than you need to, or narcissism, just naked vanity, just like I wanna be more attractive looking because I feel insecure about my body, and if more women or men are attracted to me, then I'll be more affirmed, like I'll feel more like everything's okay, which is I guess
Mhm.
another form of fear, but it's definitely not a pleasant driver. Like if you're just sweating every little calorie because you're so freaked out about the fact that you don't have a six pack and you might never get a six pack, and what will it mean for you if you don't get one, then obviously this is all just like very shallow levels, I think, of kind of hell. And what you're talking about is instead of the ego having an agenda and saying, I know what's good for me, here are my following orders to my body. It's something more like, I would respectfully ask that some deeper voice guide me to tell me what I need. And then I can really enjoy it. And then I can have surplus energy rather than chipping away at my energy, which is being driven by my own horrible vanity,
Yeah,
or gnawing
exactly.
anxiety of death.
And I think for that inner voice to be heard or come up in whatever way, shape, or form, is that I think a practice of stillness is absolutely essential.
You've talked to me about this before, and I really like it. But I just here's the thing. I just there's something, and maybe this is a prelude to the panic attack that I've kind of experienced over the previous week that has really enlightened me as to just how bent out of shape I think I actually was, and how far away from a truly calm, sane, spiritualized life I was. But I do find that sometimes standing in stillness for long periods of time actually brings out a kind of an anxiety, a sense like I'm not ready for this. If I lay down on the ground, then I think I can can have it. I can enjoy that feeling of peace. But if I do anything like standing but not moving, I think something happens, something comes over me where I go, I don't understand. My body doesn't understand what's happening, and it seems to be like it goes into fight or flight or something.
That's so interesting that it's not the same if you're, let's say, vegetating lying down. But
Because I'm
that,
used to lying down and not really moving around much when I do, but I'm really
oh
not used
yeah,
to
okay.
standing stock still for long periods of time. I basically never do it. Even if I was waiting in a queue, I'm kind of fidgeting around, but I'm not
hmm
actively going, I'm engaging my musculature enough to stand, but I'm not going to move, you know?
Yeah. So I suppose there's an association that you may not realize you have with what the act of standing is and compared to lying down. One thing I've noticed when I like share the practice of standing still is that there can be this ideal that I should feel a particular way and I'm not, and that means I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's the
As in like
worst.
rather than just feeling or being with it, even if it is a melancholy or a concern or whatever it may be. But I think what's more inductive of a state of suffering or panic or unpleasant feeling of being there is actually just that conflict of what I think I ought to be feeling or how
Yeah,
I should be. And I think then when I know from my own experience, if I can just settle into what it is I am feeling and actually feel myself without any expectation of how I ought to be, it's straight. I almost find that it's straight away. It's like, oh yeah, what's the problem? This is fantastic. Like
yeah,
it is melancholy, or it is. Yeah, I'm just still feeling myself. It doesn't
yeah.
mean it's bad or good or ought or anything. This is me feeling me. I'm just feeling it.
It's kind of like an arrogance in a way because you're like saying, I know what this is, therefore I know what it should be. As opposed to, if you were to say something like, I'm going to conduct standing investigations today, or I'm going to conduct like press ups investigations. Like, I don't have a clear sense of exactly what it should be or feel like or reveal itself to be. I'm actually going to explore what happens today because it's definitely going to be different from yesterday and whatever it will be tomorrow. And actually, it kind of spills over into everything because let's say you're married or you have a job or something. You essentially know what these things are, your marriage, your career, you know what they are. But if every day you met them at like, I'm going to conduct my marriage explorations today or my career exploration, what will it reveal? What hidden side of itself will it reveal to me today? Like your experience would be totally different then.
hmm
It's not operating appropriately. I'm frustrated because it's not delivering what I fully expected and demanded.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So then what we're talking about really is the problem is an expectation, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But this is back to the asshole default system that we all operate from. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Is it asshole or is it like I don't know. I don't like to see this
yeah,
something I've been
I
practicing
agree.
lately, and it's probably since 2020, is this um I suppose being aware of how I talk to myself, the inner voice, let's say.
That's good. That's good.
And
You're right. I'm
and
actually too harsh on my inner,
in a
my
critic,
inner description of my behavior is too harsh.
yeah, right. And it takes a while, I think, to actually peg that one down. And then I ended up doing online coaching in 2020, and I think it was just by working with others in this capacity and not in a direct personal training physical therapist environment. I was working like through Zoom, like discussing like you and I don't know. It was more the psychology of a movement practice was where I ended up exploring with my clients at the time.
No, I could totally see that of you. Mm.
And what I found interesting then was actually this inner voice thing and then developing practical critique. So I think the asshole is the cue. It's like the light bulb on the dash to say, problem, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
But then to like writing an essay, for example, you dig further. You like it's like the metal detector. It's like something's here, and it comes up on my screen as
Yes.
asshole. I'm gonna dig further, and then we'll go further. It's like, oh, the issue was I had an expectation, and then we dig a little further, and it was like, oh, I'm running away from myself.
You put on your plastic glove and your latex glove and you stick your hand as far up that asshole as you can until you
I
pull out
figure out what it is.
something.
Ah, no, I found it. This stick was up here the whole time. And yeah,
Okay, so like to sum up, because
yeah,
if anyone out there in the void is listening to this, I don't want to eat up too much of their time.
very good.
And I I appreciate that it takes a weird act of faith to hang out, lingering around other people's conversation, particularly when there's somebody out there. But for what it's worth, Robbie, like if no one else ever listens to this, I think that the value of learning to talk to each other, even as we imagine people are listening, and trying to be of service to them, even if we never are, that alone is a good template for how to live, I think.
I can only agree with that. I mean, the worst case scenario is that I benefit from the discussion. And if somebody else does at the same time, then kudos, bonus points. And I'm delighted
Thanks.
for them.
Yeah. But I really want everything I do from now on to be in some way offered up uh, for others, even if it's a really small gesture. Like I just I know it sounds kind of trite, particularly if you've been raised in a household, let's say, that practices saying grace or has a gratitude practice or whatever it may be. But I don't really know what I've been doing for the last umpteen years, but it definitely hasn't been offering up my activity as a service to others. It's definitely been how can I get more comfortable? How can I get more impressive? How can I get more? And I just it's just fallen away from me. I don't know why, but if this project can play any bit of a role in getting people even remotely closer to that space, I'm all in.
Before we close out, I'm obligated to push back to some degree on what you just said, because you're a teacher, and I'm sure you're serving your students immensely well. And I, you've offered me private tuition in both writing and music, and that has certainly served me to the umpth degree because now I adore writing and I can do it to the end of my days, and I adore making and playing music and I can do that
Nice.
to the end of my days. So you've gifted me unbelievably well. So if
Yeah, but you've
anything,
also taught me the movement classes for free, so I feel like this is just a gift exchange. I can kind of dismiss everything that way as a gift exchange, and I work because I'm paid to do it. I happen to love doing it, and I do it to the best of my ability. But I can also dismiss that as something I'm doing because I'm paid to do it. So I kind of what I guess what I'm looking for is something that really feels like a gift I'm giving to people I've kind of never met. I don't know why
yeah,
that's so valuable to me, but it is.
good. Right on. I'm delighted for you that this has got such meaning to it.
Yeah, it really does actually. Thanks.
Right on. Cool. Will we leave it at that?
Cool. All right. I'll be in contact soon.
All the best, my man.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Bye.